Hi, how's it going? Hello, everyone. Most people probably don't need a multi-process welder. I think I can make a case that a stick welder may be the only welder you need. In this video, I'm going to try to do just that. I'm sure by the time I finished that last sentence, many people were already typing in the comments that I'm wrong. No problem, I probably agree with your points. I would never say that a stick welder is the best welding process. I could probably even make an argument for why your only welder could be a TIG welder, a MIG welder, or even a flux core welder. In fact, I may eventually make each of those videos. No doubt, each process has advantages and disadvantages, which is why multi-process welders are popular. But today, I'll be talking about why I think a stick welder could suffice as your only welder, at least for most people. There admittedly are disadvantages to stick welding, so let's get a couple of the big ones out of the way. Stick welding does take some getting used to, and it can be frustrating at times, especially on thin metal or complex parts. It's also the dirtiest process with spatter, soot, slag, and smoke galore. Proper ventilation is best, and a simple respirator is a good idea if the ventilation is not great. You aren't going to stack dimes with a shiny rainbow finish with stick welding. And some projects could be downright challenging with a stick welder, if not impossible. For example, welding up a chromoly roll cage for a race car probably isn't a good application for a stick welder. Trying to get a good-looking aluminum weld or welding thin aluminum period probably also isn't a good application for a stick welder. And I can't imagine a stick welder would be many people's first choice for auto body work. Sounds pretty bad so far. But there is a reason why I say most people probably don't need a multi-process welder, and most people probably could get by with a stick welder. Most people aren't making chromoly roll cages for a race car or making an aluminum ski tower for a speedboat. They're doing light fabrication and repairs. And while it has its limitations, a stick welder is actually quite versatile. You can get nickel rods for welding cast iron, you can get stainless steel rods, aluminum rods, all kinds of different sizes, etc. Thin metal is definitely tricky, but with the right rods and some practice, you can weld relatively thin metal. Stick welding also doesn't require shielding gas. This means that wind won't blow your shielding gas away, and you don't have to carry around a gas bottle, so it's a very portable and outdoor-friendly process. With many rods, it's also a process that is relatively forgiving of, let's say, less than perfect prep. Sure, even with stick, you can get better results if the metal is clean and free of mill scale, but stick welding is definitely more forgiving of a little mill scale or a little surface rust than TIG or even MIG. There's also virtually no consumables to worry about. Obviously, you need stick rods, just like MIG needs spools of wire and TIG needs filler rods, but that's it. You don't need shielding gas, tungsten electrodes, contact tips, nozzles, collets, cups, liners, or any of that. As long as you have the welder and some rods, you'll never go out to do a quick project and realize your torch fell and broke your last ceramic cup, or you're out of gas, or your last contact tip or collet is burnt up. And stick welders themselves are also relatively simple and generally the least expensive type of welder. This is doubly true because you don't need to purchase extra stuff like regulators, gas bottle, etc. You can get some really cheap flux core machines these days, and they don't need a lot of accessories either, and you can spend a lot on a stick welder if you want. But there are just so many options when it comes to stick welders. You can get anything from a $60 4-pound inverter from China, a high-end industrial machine, an engine-driven stick welder, or even a 50-year-old 200-pound transformer machine that still works. As long as they burn rods, you can get work done with them. So let's run a few different rods in different situations on different materials, different thicknesses, and see what can be done with a stick welder. First up, I welded a few little pieces of 16-gauge steel. Not super thin, but outside corners are generally pretty easy to burn through anyway, but with 1/16" 7014 rods and a relatively fast travel speed, I had no issues with burning through. The 1/16" rods are very bouncy, so they're a little hard to control, but at 30 amps, there's not a lot of heat, so stabilizing them with a gloved finger works pretty well. For tacking, I actually like to cut a rod in half with a pair of snips to make two shorter rods because they're much more controllable when they're shorter. I also welded up a couple of 1/8" aluminum T-joints. This is actually the first time I've ever tried to weld aluminum with stick. I used 3/32 inch 4043 rods, first at 70 amps and then at 80. It didn't come out great, but I bet if I spent some time and a handful of rods practicing, I'd get better. There's a lot of flux and the rods burn away incredibly fast, so it's tough to be consistent. But as you can see, aluminum can be welded with stick, as long as you don't need pretty welds. I don't have much stainless steel lying around the garage, but I had these two little pieces, so I welded them together with a 3/32 inch 312 stainless rod. The slag was a bit tough to remove, but I've never used 312 stainless rod before, so I'm not sure if that's normal with that rod, or if I just maybe had the heat a little off. But either way, you can definitely weld stainless steel with a stick welder. I also have some 309L stainless rods, and the slag seems a little easier to remove and it leaves a nice shiny bead, but it's only 1/16 of an inch, at least the rods I have, which are a bit thin for this. After that, I just welded up some random stuff. I started welding out this little pyramidal lap joints. I welded a piece of square tubing to a plate, welded up a couple little cubes, and more. I used some 6013, some 7014, and some 7018. But honestly, other than the 1/16 inch 7014 rods I used for the 16 gauge steel, I could have used 3/32 size of any of those rods for pretty much all the mild steel welding I did today. 7018 is probably my personal favorite overall rod, but for general purpose welding, it's not like you have to have a bunch of different types of rods on hand. Just pick one you like to run and you should be good. I'm sure someone could point to many of these pieces, particularly the aluminum, and argue that a TIG or MIG welder would have been easier or done a better job. Probably true, but keep in mind, no welding process guarantees perfect results. And practice is the most important factor to getting good results with any process. Ultimately, I started out with a varied assortment of stuff on the table, and I was able to tack it all together and weld it all up with a stick welder, including some aluminum, even though it looks pretty rough. Maybe a multi-process welder makes sense for you, or that's just what you want. There are certainly a host of options out there these days. But I bet a lot of people could get by with just one process, and in that case, I think a stick welder is worth consideration. They aren't the easiest, they have some limitations, and they're almost definitely the dirtiest. But they are simple, cost-effective, and versatile. I know this was far from an exhaustive representation of what all a stick welder can do, but hopefully it was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care.